John Money introduced the idea of gender identity. He coined the term gender identity, and he said that the gender identity is completely separate from biology, and that it is something, it is one's identity as male or female, because back then, of course, we didn't have the non-binary and, in between all that, 47 different genders stuff. So in the 50s, when John Money was writing and speaking about all this, we had male and female. And his theory was that male and female is something that is foisted on a baby, a child, by society, and that it is unrelated to biology. He further said that men and women, males and females, have biological distinctions, but they are limited to menstruating, gestating, and lactating. And that was it. Aside from those three things, everything else in terms of personality and preferences for activities or, cognitive abilities, emotional styles, perceptions, that is all, it's a social construct, okay? It's all put on the child in the first 2.5 to 3 years of life. And then John Money said it's fixed. So, when you put the pink blanket on the little girl and the blue blanket on the boy, and then you give them the toys and you give them, you have certain expectations based on whether it's a boy or a girl. And all those things, the frilly dresses and the 50s was a time, of course, of stereotypes. So he spoke about it in terms of, the girl's going to be in the kitchen making cookies and the boy's going to be out, fixing the car with his dad. And he said, if you take a girl, with ambiguous, okay, I'm sorry, let me go back a minute. John Money's specialty, his interest was in hermaphrodites, okay? Very rare babies that are born with ambiguous genitalia. And those ambiguous genitalia are due to some congenital issue, either endocrinological or due to chromosomal abnormality. And the baby is born, they take a look at the genitals, it's just not clear what's going on. And that's where the term comes from. This is important. Assigned sex at birth. Assigned. Because in those cases, and these were the cases that John Money became an expert in, and he opened up a center specifically having to do with, his PhD that he wrote in the 50s was on the issue of sex assignment of hermaphrodites. What do you do? It's a crisis. You have to say we had a girl or we had a boy. And so what do you do in those cases? And he had a special interest in this. Now, you and I know that when someone has a certain interest in their life that consumes them to the point that they're writing their PhD about it, they're studying it, they make it their career, there's usually a reason behind it. And it's worthwhile exploring that reason. Now, when you look at John Money and his early life, and he wrote about this, he was very open about it. He grew up under the hand of an abusive, alcoholic, out of control father who would beat him and his mother. So John Money, as a child, was not only beaten, but watched his mother being beaten. He no doubt had a terrible childhood, and that influenced his image of masculinity was this monstrous individual. And he wrote later on, he grew up on a farm, by the way, that he realized that the world might be better off if not only animals, but men were gelded at birth, castrated. So he said that the world might be a better place if men were gelded. And he also wrote, I wear the vile mark of male sexuality. In other words, we would call that gender dysphoria. Mm-hmm. He's talking about his own body, and he's saying that his genitals were vile to him. That is gender dysphoria. We didn't call it then. We didn't have a name for it back then. So clearly, John Money was uncomfortable, to say the very least, with his own masculinity and his own body. So it's not a surprise that he would come up with a theory that, if true, would comfort him on some level, that he is not going to become his father. He's not his father. Even though he shares the same type of physical reality, his body, his genitals are of a man. But if his theory is true, and there's such a thing as gender, which is completely separate than biology, it gave John Money like a way out of not identifying with a monster.
Well, so you can imagine the psychological impetus there is if you make the initial assumption that there's a certain degree of innate pathological aggression associated with masculinity, and then you develop a counter theory that much of that is in fact socialized, then there's a route out of it, and that gives him him an easy out. That's the thing, is that instead of having to contend with that internally, he can also externalize that and make that a sociological phenomena. I see this with the insistence on the trans activists' part that trans identity is much more common than it truly is, and that it's immoral to interfere with its manifestation. I see that as an extension of Freudian rationalization. You know, if you've taken a dramatic route in your life, or something dramatic has happened to you, you have every reason to justify your decision post hoc. And so let's walk through what happened with Money. So he got involved in a very famous case, which he certainly did. Playing out.
He certainly did. But let's just tell your audience furthermore that he wrote his PhD on hermaphrodites and on how to assign their sex. And then he went on to open the first clinic in the United States for hermaphrodites for their treatment, including their surgeries. So he made available, for the first time in the United States, a place where there would be gender reassignment or sex reassignment, including the surgeries. And the surgeries involved castration, of course. So we go back to what he said about being gelded. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I can't help but think that on some level, he might have been thinking, you know, I'm helping these kids. I'm helping these little boys by gelding them, by castrating them, and making them into women. Of course, they can't be made into women, but the way that he was thinking about it. So he had his theory, and he didn't have any way of proving it because, I mean, how do you prove something like that? Until this family showed up at his doorstep. And it was a Canadian family from Winnipeg, I think, right?
I think that's right.
Yeah. And they were the Reamer family, a blue-collar, very young couple, 20, 21 years old. And they had a horrific tragedy in their family, which is that they gave birth to twin boys. The boys were fine. And when the boys were, well, actually they had phimosis. Phimosis is a abnormality of the opening of the urethra at the tip of the penis. And so the doctors recommended circumcision for the boys. And they went in when they were 8 months old for circumcision. And the first boy to go in for the circumcision was Bruce. There was a malfunction of the equipment. And instead of just that small amount of tissue that was supposed to be cauterized, apparently the settings were incorrect and the entire penis was burnt. So Bruce's penis was burnt, beyond any functionality. So these poor parents went home. The other boy was not circumcised, just obviously. They went home, and what are they supposed to do? They have a boy without a penis. What the hell are they supposed to do? So months later, they were watching television, and John Money happened to be on there. And you have to know also that John Money was an extremely pompous, self-assured, he was sophisticated. When he talked, you listened. He came across as being definitive, being, calling the shots, knowing what was going on, knowing the research, knowing the truth. And he, in this interview on television, said that a boy can be raised as a girl and a girl can be raised as a boy if it's done early enough. And that early enough means before the age of 2.5 or 3. And the parents, the Reamer parents, immediately took note of that, and they thought, here's the answer. This is the answer for Bruce. This is what we're supposed to do. So they contacted Dr. Money, and they made an appointment and took the twins down to Baltimore and went down there. Again, you have to understand that this was a uneducated, young blue-collar family. And when they were interviewed later about their meetings with John Money, they described him as like, we just thought he was God. Mm-hmm. We just thought, he's a professor and he's, got all the diplomas and he's the head of this entire
new
clinic. At an outstanding university, one of the major universities in the world.
That was at Johns Hopkins, right?
Yes,
yeah, right.
Yes. So you have to imagine this young couple coming, and they're at a loss, and they are looking for an answer. They've been praying. They're looking for an answer to their prayers. What are we going to do with Bruce? And John Money says, well, we have an answer for you, because male and female is actually not related to chromosomes. It's not related to hormones. It's not innate. We can take little Bruce, and we have to do some surgery on Bruce. We have to castrate him, and we'll remove his testicles. He already didn't have a penis. We're going to remove his testicles. We're going to fashion, some sort of elementary sort of female genitalia. You're going to give him a girl's name, and you're going to put him in pink dresses and give him dolls and raise him as a girl. And you are never, ever, Dr. Money told the parents, never to tell him that this was truly what happened and after he was born. Never tell him, because that will ruin everything. And it's up to you. You have to just work your hardest to raise him as a girl and make sure that everyone around him, considering him a girl, because essentially he is a girl. And so not only was this the answer to the Reamers' prayers, this was, as you can understand now, the answer to Dr. Money's prayers.
Right. He had an experiment.
This was the experiment. This was his proof of concept. His concept was that being male and female is completely separate from biology. It's imposed by society. It's a social construct. And this was his proof of concept. And so the Reamers went home. Well, he had his surgery. They took him home. They named Bruce Brenda. They put him in all the girls' clothing, and they gave him dolls, and they did all the things. And he peed sitting down sometimes, because as we'll learn later, he actually preferred urinating standing up, which is astonishing. We learned later that he always wanted to urinate standing up. And from the time he was in diapers, I think, he was told he was a girl. So they took him home, raised him as a girl, and Dr. Money started to follow the twins every year. Dr. Money would take the twins without the parents into his office and spend time with the twins. So this went on for years. And Dr. Money began to report on his study that became a famous landmark study. And he called her Joan in his study. He was beginning to write about this and lecture. And he was claiming that Joan, AKA Brenda, AKA Bruce, was doing great. I mean, she was adjusting. She may be a bit of a tomboy. He would acknowledge that. But in every way, she was adjusting, and she was doing well with friends and with schools, and she liked playing with dolls, and she would mimic her mom. And he was giving this glowing, glowing report from year to year, and in his professional writing of his studies, his report, and he was giving talks, and he was getting, you might imagine, tremendous attention for this. I mean, you have to understand, this was by now the early 60s. This is feminism, okay? This is the sexual revolution. This is a time when society, or at least part of society, wanted nothing more to say that male and female is a social construct. And that in order to gain, full equality, women have to be considered the same as men. And, to have a study such as this study of John Money's, in which he was reporting that this baby who was XY, normal chromosomes, normal everything biologically, but is being successfully raised as a girl because he has a girl's name and girls and dresses and dolls and all, his entire society, his teachers and his grandparents and everyone is reinforcing the idea that he's a delicate girl who likes to cook and, is going to grow up to have babies. I mean, this was huge. Now, what happened is that this theory of John Money's was accepted over the decades. We didn't find out what really happened with the twins until decades later. And in the meantime, during those decades, his theory became doctrine. Okay, his theory became just baked into, so many fields of both soft and hard science, so that it was standard that whenever you had, for example, any child that had ambiguous genitalia, if they could be raised as a girl, they'd be raised as a girl. So they'd be castrated just automatically. Why? Because of the great success, because of what John Money proved to us. And so lots and lots of boys all over the world. I mean, this was written into the textbooks of endocrinology and the textbooks of genetics. I mean, this became truth, so to speak. Not that there weren't people, other scientists that were standing up and saying, John, this isn't proven yet. Let's look a little closer. This is not necessarily the case. But what did he do? He wouldn't tolerate that. John Money, was a tyrant. He would not tolerate another psychologist or biologist or geneticist standing up and trying to publish something that would challenge his great gender theory. He would intimidate the editors at the scientific journals to not publish those articles. It's a lot of what's actually going on right now is very similar.
Right.
So,
right.
So what happened with the twins is that after decades, in fact, John Money wrote a book in 1997 in which he said yet again that his twin study, that his gender theory had been confirmed and supported by the results of this experiment with the twins. And the following...
One person experiment, by the way, a one-person experiment.
Yeah, but even that one person, it didn't work. So in 1998, what do we call him now? Not Brenda, not Bruce, but what happened is that we discovered that he stood up, he just blew the cover of this whole thing was a hoax. And his name was now David. Brenda had become David. And he was not only a man, but he was married to a woman and he had adopted 3 stepchildren. And he worked as a janitor in a slaughterhouse.
Right.
So that was David Reamer. And people can go onto YouTube and hear him being interviewed about his experience of what it was like to be told for 14 years of his life that he's a girl, and to never, ever, ever feel that was his truth. And what happened is that during all those years, he was not happy with his dresses and with his dolls. He wanted to go play with his brother's toys. He wanted to pee standing up. He was rough. He was so boyish and aggressive that kids called him cave woman. Okay, they made fun of him because the way that he walked and his gestures and his interests were all so masculine. And he was a miserable child, and the family was miserable. And on top of everything, when the family was going back for those yearly visits to Johns Hopkins with Dr. Money was sexually abusing those twins.
Okay, how?
He was forcing them to undress and to mimic sexual intercourse. And he would say, this is what men and women do together. And he would, humiliate them and show them pictures. And the point came, why did they stop going down to Johns Hopkins? The boys refused to go. They refused to go back to see Dr. Money, and the parents couldn't understand why.
He was quite the stunning creep, all things considered. Now, the Johns Hopkins also closed that clinic down, eh? Not how long after these revelations emerged did they close down?
Well, then that would have been Dr. Paul McHugh, who was a giant in this area, and he had the wisdom and the foresight, to understand what was going on. Some studies that were done that would follow up on the individuals who had the sex reassignment to see how they were doing, and those studies showed that they were still really suffering. They hadn't necessarily benefited from that surgery. So, and he wrote about that in a great book, Dr. Paul McHugh, his book called The Mind Has Mountains. And he wrote a chapter called Surgical Sex, explaining how we would be wise if we pay attention to their psyches and help them emotionally and psychologically and not try to change their bodies. So Dr. McHugh closed up John Money's clinic. That is true. But you know what? The harm was already done. By the time it became public knowledge, and actually it's not even to this day such public knowledge, unfortunately, when it became public knowledge and a book was written by John Colapinto called As Nature Made Him, the boy that was raised as a girl, and it just told this entire story from A to Z. It's a shocking, shocking story. And everyone should read that book. So by the time that book came out in 1999 or 2000, that theory was already baked into sex education and sociology and psychology. I mean, look, I have a book, Dr. Peterson, I have a book that was published in 1998 for kids. I brought it with me, Show and Tell. This book came out. It's called My Gender Workbook. And it has on the cover, the picture here is half a Barbie and half a Ken. Okay. Obviously a book for young people. And the entire premise of this book is that the gender binary is false. We do not all fit into this category of male and female. And they're not talking about hermaphrodites or intersex, okay? They're talking about none of us. No one fits into it. It's oppressive, and we need to rebel against it. So clearly written by, the author is Kate Bornstein, an individual who has had a very interesting gender journey, going back and forth, born as a male, then a female, then back, and then neither. And this individual, Kate Bornstein, in 1998, again, I want to emphasize how long ago this book was available and written for young people to challenge them and to indoctrinate them with the idea that society is placing on you these false restrictions. Society is telling you that you have to be a boy or a girl. That is something that it's like racism. It's like sexism. It's a terrible thing.
It's patriarchal oppression.
Yes, and we have to break.
In its purest form.
So, you have to understand that this is very enticing for teenagers who want to believe in something and want the world to be a better place. And they want to fight against something. They want to fight against the evil. So this is presented as another evil that exists in society. So let me just be clear. A book like this, and an individual such as Kate Bornstein, who had a very active schedule, speaking on campuses, public appearances, all over the place, being made into a celebrity. This is all happening at a time when psychiatry still considered this a disorder. Okay, this is 1998. The APA only changed the DSM in 2013. So this is 15 years before that. So what I'm trying to say is this.
Now, what happened to David Reimer? What happened? David Reimer committed suicide eventually, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yes. So that's the denouement of that particularly tragic case.
And his twin.
So not only was this a failure, it was and go ahead.
Oh no, it was a disaster, terrible disaster. He committed suicide, and his twin brother died of an opiate overdose. Before him, his twin died first. The entire family was, what kind of words? Traumatized. It's not enough. Trauma is not enough to describe what that family went through.
My parents didn't know a lot that was going on. And if they would have known, it never would have happened. By me not saying anything, the medical community was under the impression that my case was a success story. And I was shocked when I heard that people thought that my case was a success story.
So what we should point out here is that this experiment couldn't possibly have gone more cataclysmically wrong than it did. Right? Not only was what Money was saying was not true in the technical scientific sense, it was an anti-truth, and he falsified the data, and it culminated in the death of two people, the demolition of a family, and the perversion of an entire culture. That's John Money's legacy. And
he never publicly acknowledged it. I don't know what John Money died, I think, in 2006, and I think he had dementia. But when the book came out, and when John Colapinto's book came out that just like exposed this whole calamity, there was nothing from John Money. He was still alive. He could have made a statement. Nothing. I'm just saying that that's just another, indication of what the morality, the immorality of this person, the lack of acknowledgement, of what they're guilty of doing. I mean, I guess it's too much to expect.
You were making a case a bit that part of the reason the psychiatric and psychological professions, the medical professions, did tilt in this gender-affirming direction was because Money's research was taken as gold standard, and the pathology of that research wasn't revealed until like 25 years later. And so that excuses the profession to some degree. But by your testimony as well, all of this started to become pretty public knowledge by about the year 2000, that the Money experiment had actually gone cataclysmically wrong. And yet what we've seen on the psychological, psychiatric, and counseling front, medical as well, is a doubling down
Correct.
of the insistence that gender is nothing but something that's socialized.
Correct.
And that medical transition is the appropriate move. Okay, so that's all flying in the face of evidence now instead of being supported
Correct.
by evidence. And so what? And
But
do you have any thoughts
yeah,
about?
but not only that, it became more and more and more radical. So where we are today and where we are, I mean, even this book in 1998 is much more radical than John Money. At least John Money said, you're either male or female, and that that's fixed by the age of 3. Okay, by 1998, kids were being told, no, that's an oppressive false binary. It's all on a spectrum. It's all fluid. And it's fluid for your entire life. And it's wonderful to explore and to question, and no one can tell you who you are, and just a million different ways. It's so much more radical. I mean, I wish almost, that we were back with John Money's theory, because it would be so easy to it's so easy now. We have so much information from hard science. In fact, if John Money were living today, he could never get published with such a theory that he had about gender and biology. I mean, it's ridiculous. We have too much information about the impact of the chromosomes prenatally and the impact of hormones. So we know now that male and female, it's not only different genitalia, not only what John Money pointed out, lactating and menstruating. We have each cell in our bodies, except for cells that don't have a nucleus, which are very few, but every cell that has a nucleus is stamped male or female, and it makes a difference.
Right.
Okay, so there's a female heart. We know now in cardiology that when it comes to, for example, arrhythmias, there's a difference in the type of arrhythmias that a woman might get as opposed to a man. There's a difference in the way that a woman who sustains a very difficult burn, how her body might react to it as opposed to a man. And this is true for every system of the body. So,
So your point is that not only do you see a gender difference, a sex difference, at the chromosomal level, but you see it at the cellular level, and you see it at the level of systems of cells,
Correct.
so organs. You see it at the level of broad physiology. We talked about lactation and menstruation and gestation, but there's the entire menstrual cycle. There's the completely different effect of hormones. All of that manifests itself in different perceptual patterns and in temperamental patterns that are sex type to a large degree. And so the point here is that what constitutes sex is instantiated as part of identity at every single level of the hierarchies that people are embedded in, biologically and then also socially, because the social roles that are assigned to men and women are not merely arbitrary, right? I mean, part of what you see with parents is that the manner in which parents socialize their children is much more directed by the children than people had originally presupposed. And so parents who are establishing a genuine relationship with their children use the cues from the child's behavior to govern their interactions with the child. And so more feminine girls tend to be treated by their parents as more feminine creatures, and more masculine boys, etc. But the idea that that's all top-down socialization instead of bottom-up influence of biology is utterly preposterous, even though human beings are quite flexible in the manner in which they can be socialized. So,
well, the thing is, kids are being led to believe, and parents are being led to believe, that you can step in with these very powerful medications, these hormones, and you can deny biology, and you can pause biology, and you can create
you
can create a persona of the opposite sex without paying a huge price. That is the lie that's being told, that you're not going to pay a price for this. Oh, yeah, there might be a few side effects.
Yep.
No.
You mean like a whole missing forearm, for example, and a penis that doesn't work, and sterility and lowered voice and decreased bone density and the increased probability of the development of cancer, and no evidence whatsoever that there's any mental health benefit, and all the trauma that you put your family through, and all the regret that's going to emerge later in life when you find out that you're sterile, no ability to breastfeed, and complete loss of erotic sensation in the nipples, and et cetera, et cetera. You mean those risks, those trivial, by the wayside risks that are completely ignorable given all the euphoria you're going to experience when you put yourself in the hands of liars and butchers?
So this is what parents don't know that they must understand. And they have to understand this before their kid comes home and says, Mom, I'm not your daughter, I'm your son. They need to know this way before that happens. And that's what I want to do for them.
Yeah. Now, look, the way that the legacy media and the left-wing activists react to a conversation such as ours is to point out that we're scaremongering, and that this doesn't really pose a threat to, let's say, the vast majority of people, and it's of much more help to the small minority that it's aimed at than it is harm, and that what we're doing is stirring up fear and gaslighting and all the sorts of defensive maneuvers that the radicals engage in. So why do you think it's necessary for all parents, and so this isn't just parents who have kids with gender dysphoria, why do you think it's necessary for all parents to be what would you say, aware of what's going on in the schools? And why do you think that that's of sufficient widespread concern so that your concern shouldn't be just dismissed as conspiratorial delusion, let's say?
First of all, let's look at the numbers just in the past 5 years, 10 years of this explosive growth of individuals who are coming in for treatment for gender dysphoria. So there is a hysteria that we're in the midst of. Just 10 years ago, we had rates of, 1 in 10 to 30 to 100,000 people with this particular disorder. We didn't even have numbers. It was so rare, let's say 20 years ago. Those people were so rare just 10, 15 years ago. And now we have studies showing 10%, 20% of a high school class in an urban high school might identify as not being male or female. So I don't know where this is going.
Right.
Is it going to 40%? That's why parents have to be aware of this. I would also say in terms of fear-monger, the charge of fear-mongering, and it's really only a minority of people who are going to suffer, we have no data whatsoever to support that, no long-term data whatsoever. The data that we do have shows us that the regret over this, massive life change and these surgeries might take 8 to 10 years to acknowledge it and to come out with it publicly. Those people that regret it, they're not going back to the clinics and telling them. There's no one keeping the statistics on them. They're not coming back to their doctors and saying, how did you do this to me? They can't sue. It's too late.